I still look at this car and it brings back so many memories of working on my original Top Force Evo 30 years ago.
Hi guys, Brett here from Hearns Hobbies, and today we've got a very special guest. We've got Luis Sola, and Luis Sola has come into the studio today to talk to us about his Top Force Evo. Well, is it an Evo?
Well, it is an Evo, but this actual one didn't start off as an Evo. It's a tribute car, so I built it up from the parts that I could get to make it as close to the Evolution as possible. And
it is extensively modified as you would take a Top Force out of the box?
Yep, it's sort of modelled on the car that I had in 1992, which was 30 years ago.
Yep.
And I raced a couple of rounds of the Orca series back then, and at the New South Wales versus Victoria Interstate Challenge.
That's fantastic. So, as you know, there's been a lot of re-releases lately, and like you said, it's the 30th year anniversary of this car, and you've still got this out. It was at a racetrack recently.
Yep.
It's Hearns' 75th year this year, so I'd like to take the lid off and let's have a look under the bonnet.
Yeah. Underneath here it looks a little bit different to what it did back in 92.
So I suppose one of the main things is back in 1992 you wouldn't have had a brushless power plant in there.
No, it was all 1700 SCRC NiCads and brushed motors.
Yep.
The biggest thing with the Top Force back in the day was that because it was shaft drive, the car was very free, so you had not much drag in any of the drivetrains, so you could get away with, on using limited milliamps, you get away with running a hotter motor. So four-wheel drive modified back then was really hard to get 5 minutes, let alone be faster than 5.
Yeah, that's right. It was really sort of an expensive and exclusive class, wasn't it? Because it was so hard to make the 5-minute races.
Yep.
And to do so in the modified class, which is open motors. So really come down to having really good batteries and really fast motors, and that would sort of put you right sort of near the point end. Will give you an advantage.
Yeah, so as a rule of thumb sort of thing, in 92, if you're running forward modified, like a hot motor back then would have been like a 13 double or a 13 triple. This bad boy used to run an 11 turn in it. So comparing an 11 turn to a 13 turn back in those days was like you'd probably think twice about running an 11 turn in a two-wheel drive, but I used to run it in a four-wheel drive. So this car was like a missile on the straights. Yeah.
And I suppose, and we get back to, so the main difference back then, the point of difference that we keep referring to is the belt drive cars of the era.
Yep.
So the Optima, I want to say, the Yokomos, the Kyosho lasers.
Yep.
They were all belt drive configuration.
Belt drive, yeah. So all the fast guys either ran a Schumacher, a Yokomo, or a Kyosho laser.
Yeah.
And then Lou shows up with a Tamiya.
Yeah. And it was sort of, the Top Force was probably not their first competition four-wheel drive, because I suppose they had the Avanti or the Egress somewhat.
Yeah, the Egress was the big one. Yep.
Of the modern era, I suppose, and being the 90s.
Yep.
So this really brought Tamiya into the competition game.
Yeah,
so this car was around before TRF was ever conceived, I suppose.
Yeah. So the first of the prototype cars that the English guys had, these were TRF.
Yep.
They had TRF stickers all over them, and then obviously that took off, and then they came out with the Dynastorm and I think the 201X or something like that. Two-wheel drive, yeah. That's
really good. So apart from 1992, where we've now got a different style of ESC and motor, we've got a brushless configuration now and an ESC. We use just a single stick pack. Would you have used that back in the day, or was it a saddle pack configuration?
It was a saddle pack, yeah. So we had three and three.
Yep.
3 and 3 here with a loop in the middle.
Yep. So, and now that the milliamps, like you said, has gone up from 1700 was a big capacity then, upwards now, 6,000 milliamps, 5,400.
Yeah, it's just, if you told someone in 1992 that, in 30 years' time we were going to be racing with 6,000 plus milliamp batteries, they would have just laughed at you because,
Yeah, it would actually be interesting to see how a modern battery would go with a competition brushed motor of old, because we never had that sort of energy in the car to power them. So you would always get fade towards the end. There was a lot of maintenance on those motors to keep them going.
And back when we were running these cars, like we'd charge the battery in the pits, and then some of us would actually have like a little charger that we'd take to the start line to make sure that the battery was fully charged as we put the car on the grid. And we actually wouldn't switch the car on till they called 30 seconds before the start of the race. And wouldn't even touch the steering servo
Yep.
in case you drew a little bit of current, and that stopped you from doing your 5 minutes. So.
Yeah, because back then the batteries would just, if you had really good batteries, they would go, and then sort of just like cut off towards the end, you know.
Yeah.
And as they got old, and by old, like any more than sort of 6 or a dozen cycles, that would slowly degenerate to where it's really good for sort of 3 minutes or 4 minutes, and then drop off the last minute, and then they need a rematch. So it's really good how that's come away. So a few more talking points about this car.
This car, well, this car was probably not the most popular car when it came out because nobody really ran it. So it was offered to me after we drove a Tamiya Manta Ray at Knox. And the Manta Ray is basically the same suspension as this car, but it had a plastic chassis. And what caught my eye with the car was how fast it was with a 13-turn motor. This guy had like a Tamiya 13-turn motor, so I'm thinking if you use one of the known brand ones, the thing's going to be awesome.
Yep.
And I managed to get the Top Force Evolution, built it, put it on the track, and it wasn't quite right, and did a hell heap of work with it. And back then we didn't have the advent of the internet, so the only thing we could see was magazine articles. So
that's right, and the good magazines would come out like once a month, wouldn't they?
So there was a English magazine that showed some photos of the TRF Top Force where the guys had done some modifications to the rear end. So we pretty much piggybacked off that and did the same thing. That was an improvement, but then the car would always be really, really darty on the steering, and it didn't matter what we did, couldn't quite get out of it. And I, again, looking through a magazine, I saw the American guys with a laser. They were running a monoshock type rocker front shock tower. So I thought, I wonder if that would do something to the car. So what that did to this car was it stopped the front end from loading up when you came off centre. So the car could actually turn and lean before anything would happen. Because we had limited grip back then, that sort of took that initial edginess out of it, and then you could get it around the track quite well.
And still have the good suspension.
And still have the suspension, yeah. So even as late as like in 1990, even 91, some guys were using a monoshock conversion on the front of their cars. So it wasn't new. It was something that the guys were mucking around with, and I just thought I'd do it. And we jokingly made a story about how we modelled it on one of the guys I used to race with, Michael Chard, his old man, Peter Chard, used to always have a moustache. Now, we go back 30 years, and my Breddy here has got nearly the same shape front tower. So
that's right, the same shape front tower.
So that was an infamous moustache front shock tower.
Yeah, and you can see here, if we have a look on the overhead camera, you can see here it actually pivots on the front, so across the front end before it actually loads up. But then, of course, if you hit a jump or something,
you get the
it
same
does
happening on both
articulate
of them.
together.
Yep.
So it is that sort of semi-monoshock.
Yeah.
So it's sort of the best of both worlds, I suppose.
Yeah.
And even now, the other day, I saw you had it on, you had it off, you were tuning the car with it.
Yeah.
So that was really cool that it's still, relevant to this day. So we've got the advent of lipos now, we've got brushless. You've put the shock tower on there. And is there really anything else that's not too Tamiya on it?
Well, this car, because it's a tribute car, as the years have gone past, we've got some more stuff that's available. So we can get CV universal joints now that you couldn't get back in the day. You can get an aluminium prop shaft. There's some little braces here that strengthen the gearbox that the guys on the internet have made. There's also a little brace that I run now to this back tower because this was a weak point. Not that I ever broke one back in the day because we didn't have these massive triple jumps. Now, today's off-road racing, you spend more time in the air than on the track.
Yeah, they're big jumps now.
Before we just had little drop-offs and off-camber corners, so the car wasn't subjected to that sort of stuff. So
and it's more when you get it wrong. Like they're dropping out of the sky upside down, and it's really sort of
the car's not really designed for it. But given its how old it is, it still gets around pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely. It would have to be the fastest four-wheel drive out there at a recent meeting that we had.
In a straight line, anyway.
In a straight line for sure. So this one here has actually got some period tyres on it as well. Yeah. So what have you got on the rear?
So these were, I had, we used to have a magazine called Racing Lines, and they did a little episode on this car because there was a guy called Reece Birtles that used to race a Yokomo, and he was like a factory Yokomo driver, and he was unbeatable. And I actually qualified him for the first couple of rounds at the Interstate Challenge with a Tamiya. So that was big news. So Racing Lines did an article on it, and these were the same, not the same, but the same type of tyres that was on that. So these were Frua mini pins.
Yep.
Which the plastic sort of similar to what the suspension arms are made out of now.
Yeah, I know, right?
And these on the front were Kyosho dash patterns, which again really, really hard.
And they're actually like a quite modern pattern. I know that the materials have changed.
Yeah.
But that doesn't look like something that we wouldn't run today.
No,
you know what I mean? We don't really use so much dimples like that anymore.
Different surface.
Because the tracks have changed a lot. And Frua, if I'm not, were they a New Zealand company?
Yes, they were. Yeah, Frua.
And they haven't been around. Probably it's last 10 or maybe even 20 years now they haven't been around for.
Well, we haven't heard from them.
No, we haven't heard from them.
They're still around. Yeah.
They could still well be around. Yeah. And the good thing about these tyres was I remember because we reuse our wheels and we put them in acetone to take the tyres off. It breaks down the super glue and just lets us reuse the wheels. When you put Fruas in the acetone, they would like blow up like 10 times their size. It was quite comic. We go, whoa, what's happened there? You know what I mean? The first time that I did it personally.
But they come good after a while.
They come good after a while. So, but yeah, so that was really unique. I don't know what they had in their tyres, but they would literally like grow like something comical. So, yeah, well, that's really cool. And I suppose moving forward, like I said, it's the 30th anniversary of this particular car and 75 years here at Hearns. So, Lou's actually going to collaborate with us and we're actually going to do something special together and we're going to do a Luis Sola inspired Top Force.
You know what I mean? Myself, but yeah, it's I still look at this car and it brings back so many memories of working on my original Top Force Evo 30 years ago, and I still can't believe it's 30 years.
Yeah.
It's like yesterday. Still, this, although it's vintage, it's still relevant in my world because it's still
Yeah, that's really cool, and that's what I suppose that the RC racing does. I mean, and we do tend to turn over our race cars pretty quickly because they do seem to become redundant. But then you take a look back, and like you said, it becomes relevant again.
Yeah.
So that is good, and we've all got our own memories of certain things.
Yeah.
Like that go back. A lot of us have been doing it a long time, so it's a really good sort of hobby from that. And sort of taught me probably not to sell as much as my stuff as
2021.
But how much can you keep? So that is really cool. Is there any other features on here, Lou, that you'd like to talk about or run through?
Well, that's pretty much it. Like the car came fairly complete out of the box. So for example, when you bought a Yokomo, you almost threw half of it in the bin and you had to replace everything. You had to buy Lunsford turnbuckles and you had to buy different hinge pins and the arms weren't right. Whereas this car, you built it and out of the box, you already had carbon fibre chassis, you had a carbon fibre top deck, you had titanium screws, titanium turnbuckles, you had the little ball joints that were all nice fit, full bearings. So yeah, there were, what Tamiya had done with this car was make it like a luxury model with everything in it. So
it was a real, like a competition car.
It was.
It was inspired to be a competition
aimed
car.
At the top level, hence Top Force.
Yeah. And it is really cool that it's still relevant, and like I said, I'm really looking forward to working on Lou and putting together a special tribute car to the tribute car.
The tribute car, yeah.
That goes back, 30 plus years of racing and make it a very special and unique package that people can get their hands on.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Well, anyway, I think that's enough from Lou. I think we've dived into the car enough. Thanks for joining us, mate.
My pleasure.
It's been an absolute honour to have you here. And if you ever go to a 1/10 off-road track, you won't see far. Lou will be close behind somewhere.
Maybe.
No worries, guys. I'm Brett. This is Lou, and thanks for watching.
Thanks, guys.